Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning from Brussels. My name is Beatrice Coda. I work in CINEA. I'm responsible for the implementation of the Connecting Europe Facility Energy Program. And today we have organized, together with our team in CINEA, a virtual info day to present you the call for proposals for works and studies for the implementation of the projects of common interest. We have let's say, quite an extensive program, and we aim to cover the main aspects of the call for proposals, the policy context, the application and the evaluation process, and we will provide you also with valuable tips and tricks on how to write a successful proposals. If we go to the program of the Info Day, I will introduce you, let's say, how it's structured. So the program runs into 2 blocks. In the first block, we will have a first introduction by Olivier Silla, our head of department in CINEA, and this will be followed by 2 presentations from our colleagues from the Directorate General of DG ENER and the European Commission. So the first one will provide the policy context for European energy infrastructure, will be given by Joachim Balke, head of unit in DG ENER for infrastructure and regional cooperation. And then we will focus on the priorities of the call for proposals. Frank Esseler, team leader in the same unit in DG ENER, will provide you this presentation. This will be followed by, let's say, a long presentation related to the evaluation process, the eligibility, and the award criteria. We will then break for a coffee break, and then we'll move to the second part of a presentation in which we will start with a presentation from my colleague Bianca Holford on how to prepare a successful proposal. My colleague Ona Kostinaite-Grinkevicine will provide you details regarding how to present, let's say, your budget in proposals. Our legal advisor from CINEA, Giulia Fraschetti, will introduce you to the CEF2 legal provisions and provisions on the model grant agreement. And then my colleague Gloria Balilari, evaluation manager in CINEA, will provide you also on tips on how to make really your submission, your submission proposal in the funding portal. And again, we will break for a second question and answer session. We aim to finish at 1 o'clock. As I explained, the program is divided into 2 parts. And at the end of each block of presentations, we aim to take questions and answers from you. So the questions have to be submitted via our Slido. We have a code you see here in this slide. So it's a CEF Energy PCIs. So please submit as soon as possible your questions. And we will take, as I said, at the coffee break. So the first one around 11 o'clock. And the second one around 12:30, almost at the closure of the event. So with this, I want to end this short introduction to the program, and I hand over to our head of department, Olivier Silla, for a first introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and good morning to everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this Info Day on the 3rd CEF Energy Call for the project of common interest for the program 21-27, together with my colleagues from CINEA and from DG ENER. As CINEA is the executive agency established by the European Commission to implement in this financing period 21-27 a set of programs, all programs with a strong focus on the Green Deal. As you can see, these programs together represent about 55 billion euro, and without naming them all, let me just highlight, of course, besides the Connecting Europe Facility for transport and energy, also programs that have a very strong component in terms of energy policy and Green Deal, which are, of course, the Horizon Europe, so our research program for, in particular, climate, energy, and mobility. Of course, the Innovation Fund, which also has a great importance for decarbonization of the energy sector, and LIFE program with its energy efficiency component. We also, of course, have the renewable energy financing mechanism, which is a bit more focused on certain specific activities. With that, let's have a look at our portfolio of projects for the CEF Energy PCIs. So as this program was established back in 2013, so we have now a strong portfolio of projects, almost 6 billion ongoing projects, to which we will add soon a set of 6 grant agreements resulting from the call 2022 for an additional $500 million. So as you can see, the CEF portfolio of energy projects covers electricity projects, gas, CO2, and smart grids. The biggest share in terms of budget clearly goes to electricity infrastructure projects. Then we have also a very important component with natural gas projects. CO2 is growing in the very last years with already 11 actions and more than 130 million. And of course, last but not least, smart grids also with 6 actions so far, with a budget of about 300 million euro. So this is a bit the figures. Now, just to illustrate some of our success stories, of course, one big and very successful set of projects relates to the Baltic energy market interconnection. We have a set of new electricity lines in the Baltic states. It's of course a very large program, but the first steps have been very successfully implemented thanks to the CEF. We have also a set of very successful smart grid deployment. Just to mention one here, the smart grid established between Slovakia and Czechia. And gas, of course, very important, especially in the recent years and in the situation we know, with key projects that have helped to, in particular, secure the supply in many regions in Europe. And here we just want to flag the recently opened Poland-Denmark gas interconnector, the so-called Baltic pipe. But of course, these are only just a few projects to illustrate the range of our portfolio, and you are very welcome to have a look at our dashboard on our website, where you can browse basically for all programs supported by CINEA. You can browse by location, by member states, by a type of program and type of project, and there you can have a look more in detail at our previous CEF Energy grant agreements. It is always good to have a look at what has been financed when you are preparing a new application. With that, let's have a quick look at the budget. So for the 2021-2027 period, the CEF Energy budget is slightly above 5.3 billion euros. You can see that in the orange part of the graph so far for the 21 and 22 call, a small third of the budget has already been allocated to projects. So this corresponds to the current portfolio and the 6 grant agreements I was mentioning resulting from the 2022 call that we are in the process of preparing. And today we are looking at the yellow part, so the indicative budget for the call 2023, 0.75 billion, so sorry, 750 million euros. So it's with that we will get about half of the bit less than half of the total budget, which means that the remaining 2.6, the remaining budget will be allocated, 2.9 will be allocated in the coming years in yearly calls as foreseen by the work program. With that, I'm very happy to hand over to my colleague, Joachim Balke from DG NR, who will introduce us the policy context of this call for proposals. Joachim.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much. Thanks, Olivier, for the introduction. And indeed, from my side, I want to add a few words by way of explaining the policy context of CEF and how it links to our wider policy on trans-European energy networks. We can go to the next slide. Just to recall that indeed, CEF is the financing wing of our trans-European energy networks policy, and it's always very important to stress that this policy consists of, I would say, 3 layers, and one is the layer of the objectives, which you see on top. So the purpose is to choose in the context of our 10E policy and through the biannual selection of the PCI list to choose those projects which are most important in their contribution to actually all 4 policy objectives that you see on top from a European angle. So this selective function of the 10E policy is very important. The tools, which are well known, they have been in place for about a decade, are mainly, I would say, a set of objective criteria, and a selection process which relies very heavily on cooperation in regional formats, so through the regional groups with member states and stakeholders to ensure that we are able to identify those projects which have, in fact, the biggest added value and are the most urgent ones to implement in a regional context and, of course, with the European dimension. It's also important to recall that the 10E offers a toolkit, a series of instruments and advantages from which all projects selected on the PCI list benefit. That starts with preferential treatment in terms of permit granting, which is actually a very important element, as a lot of focus has been put recently on questions of acceleration of implementing such projects. And the question of permit granting, of course, and authorization procedures is quite key in that respect. So this is the first wing. The second wing is a set of regulatory measures, regulatory advantages from which PCIs benefit. And then there is indeed financial assistance through the Connecting Europe facility as a measure of last resort if projects cannot be financed through the market. We can go to the next slide. This, as I said, is a sort of a policy structure which has been in place since 2013, essentially. We have revised the 10E regulation recently, so there is a new 10E regulation which is now in force. What we have done is basically update the scope of the 10E and update the priorities. What we have left in place, at least by way of its general structure, is this set of instruments, I would say, that I mentioned on a minute ago. Perhaps it's also important to be clear that that CEF call that we're talking about today is still based on the current existing 5th PCI list, and this 5th PCI list has been established under the old 10E regulation, under the previous one. So what you see here by way of innovations in the new 10E regulation will lead to the adoption of a new PCI PMI list by the end of this year, and then will be at the basis of future CEF calls. But just to be entirely clear, it's not yet relevant for eligibility under the current CEF call. So I can be very brief just to mention that the new priorities in the new 10E regulation concern, on the electricity side, in particular offshore, where we have we have sort of some new structures in terms of coming to a selection of priority projects. In the area of gases, the most profound changes have taken place natural gas projects, fossil natural gas projects are excluded under the 10E. So this means that the current CEF call is actually the last one under which natural gas projects will still be eligible. In the future, we will focus on hydrogen and hydrogen-related categories, but also on categories which allow the integration of other low-carbon gases into the system. And one important novelty also in the future 10E is that you have a specific category for projects with third countries, the so-called projects of mutual interest. As I said, this will be relevant certainly for the next CEF call, so we will go more into detail at a future occasion. We can go to the next slide. Just to recall very briefly that the implementation of our infrastructure priority projects is certainly more important, and I would say also more urgent than ever, for a number of reasons. First of all, because in the area of renewable energy, the ambition level that we've set ourselves to achieve has been increased consecutively again and again, and only very recently we have come to an agreement with Council and Parliament to achieve a level of renewable energies already by 2030 of 42.5%, possibly upgraded to 45%. And that is actually more than a 10 percentage points increase over the currently existing target of 32% in the same time frame. So this means that there is a political agreement to accelerate the rollout of renewables very significantly, of course, in particular in the electricity sector. And that really means that the projects that will enhance the interconnectivity of in particular those regions with a very high potential for renewable energy with the rest of Europe, will become even more important than they are already. Now, of course, the other part of the policy context is the geopolitical context. Here, clearly, the necessity to further accelerate our diversification efforts, also in particular in the natural gas field, has become evident, obviously, and we're not only talking about diversification, but we're actually talking about phasing out Russian imports altogether over a very short time period, at the very latest by 27. And that means, of course, that the efforts that we have done over the last decade, and Olivier already mentioned some of the projects that have helped us to diversify away from Russian gas, have to be completed now very, very urgently. Perhaps that's enough by way of a summary on these priorities. The CEF program obviously has a crucial role in terms of enabling some of those infrastructure projects which otherwise we wouldn't be able to fund. And here we're talking about the CEF Energy Call in the area of PCIs, but of course, as you're aware, there's also a new window for CEF, which can then fund the generation side, renewable energy projects, and for example, in the field of offshore projects, these two parts of the CEF window can actually be complementary, for example, for the support to future hybrid projects. If we go to the next slide, in fact, we can skip this one. This is the repower plan, but I think you're aware of it. Perhaps a few words on, let's say, the instruments a bit more on the political side that we use. So, as I said, we have, of course, the process which is laid down in the 10E regulation, which allows us to establish the lists of projects of common interest in a biannual circle, with the help of our regional groups. But beyond that, we also have put into action structures which, let's say, complement this regional cooperation by a more political level structure. These are the four so-called high-level groups. They are very important because they allow essentially to gather support at a political level for those very important interconnector projects, which often also rely on this political level support. And they also allow in these regions to actually come to a common definition of what are really, I would say, the top priorities. So if you like, to shortlist a certain number of projects and then actually to focus all efforts on their implementation. And these structures have actually proved very successful, as I said, in shortlisting projects and in pushing them through. They are relatively different in their focus. So, I mean, just to pick two, I mean, the first one, the Central and Southeastern Europe Energy Connectivity, the so-called CEF group, has been very successful in choosing and implementing gas interconnection projects in Southeast Europe, which have really helped enormously for the countries in the region to diversify and to make themselves more independent of Russian imports. Whereas on the other hand, if we look, for example, at the third group here, interconnections for Southwest Europe, this has been very important to, in particular, get this political agreement on a number of important electricity interconnection projects, which allow to connect the Iberian Peninsula through France with the rest of Europe. And that is, of course, very important in view of the renewables potential. Next slide, please. So we have currently, as I said, the fifth list of PCIs in place. This is the list of projects which are eligible to apply for financial support under this CEF call. Indeed, also here we can see that electricity projects form the majority of projects on the list. We have still a significant but reduced number of gas projects on the list, which does reflect that we've made very important progress in actually achieving this diversification through gas infrastructure. And we also have an important but still limited number of projects in the area of carbon dioxide networks and smart grid projects on the list. And here we will, of course, see whether for the next PCI list, where these projects these categories have been a little bit adapted in scope, we might potentially have a somewhat higher number of projects. So we can go to the next slide already. This is important because it underlines what I said earlier on. The 10E envisages a number of tools which can allow and facilitate the implementation of such projects. And here we're talking about the financing of projects of common interest. And there is, in a sense, a filter which is to ensure that grants for works are really only the last resort option for those projects which otherwise couldn't get to financial closure. There is a set of instruments which is to help them to find the necessary resources. First of all, the cross-border cost allocation, so an agreement between the regulators concerned on how to split the costs. Such a cross-border cost allocation is actually a mandatory criterion if a project wants to apply for grants for works. Then we have rules on regulatory incentives in the 10E, for example, in relation to projects with a higher risk profile or which are innovative, which should, through the regulatory framework, be able to recuperate such costs. But then, indeed, if all of these instruments do not suffice, then there is the potential to give grants for works for a subset of PCIs. As you will have seen from Olivier's slide on the remaining budget, this, of course, can only be a relatively limited number. Whereas in terms of grants for studies, we of course have the possibility to give this to a higher number of projects. We can go to the next slide, and I will be very short. This mirrors a little bit what I said earlier on in relation to the high-level groups. We see that there are important priorities left for electricity actually in all major regions of Europe. Perhaps just to touch on the two regions I haven't mentioned earlier on in BMIP, so around the Baltic Sea. Obviously, the question of synchronizing the Baltic states with the Central European grid remains a core priority, and there are still a number of important sub-projects on the PCI list which need to be completed quite soon. And in the Northern Seas area, we're talking, of course, about the integration of the significant offshore potential into the European grid. And perhaps just to pick one project, we also have a direct interconnector between France and Ireland, which would actually then be the first direct connection of Ireland with an EU member state after Brexit. So these projects are obviously of high importance. If we look at the next slide, which is on the gas projects, here we see that the needs are already a little bit more focused, I would say, because we are, I think, more advanced. And of course, we are also in a situation where the use of fossil natural gas is slowly going to be reduced. This is why the needs here are relatively concentrated in Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe, where indeed there are a number of additional projects which still need to be completed in order to be able to completely replace fossil fuel and gas imports from Russia. Without going more into detail, let's go to the next slide. Thanks very much. So then very briefly on the way forward. As you can see, 79 PCIs have already been completed, of which 30 have received CEF support. So it has been an important instrument for a bit less than half of the projects completed so far. Now, after the entry into force of the 10E regulation, the new 10E regulation, we will have the first PCI and PMI list adopted by the Commission this autumn. It will then go to the scrutiny period and be legally in force at the beginning of next year. So as I said, it should be in place to be the basis for the next CEF call in 2024. And lastly, we will also have to work on a new multi-annual work program for CEF that will cover the second half of the period of this MFF, which will be adopted then to be in place as of 2024. That's all from my side. Thanks very much, and back to you, Beatrice, I think.
Thank you, Joachim, for this very comprehensive presentation on the policy context on the European energy infrastructure policy. And now I hand over to our colleague Frank Esseler, who will provide an overview on the CEF Energy Multi-Annual Work Programme and the priorities for the 23 PCI call for proposals. Frank, to you.
Thank you, Beatrice, and good morning to all. So, to follow up on what Joachim has said on the policy context, I would now like to talk about the financing context, and that is our multi-annual work program for CEF Energy. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, the CEF Energy multi-annual work program is really what breaks down the objectives of the CEF as a whole, of the CEF regulation, into operational building blocks. And this work program answers a couple of questions, namely, what is eligible as far as energy is concerned? What is the budget that we allocate for this period of 3 years, so 2021 and 2023? And what is the financial support available for those actions that are selected for funding? As you can see here, the work program covers calls for proposals, essentially, such as the one we're carrying out today, for projects of common interest under the 10E regulation, so for infrastructure projects, but also, and this is a new category, we have some CEF funding available for cross-border projects, cooperation projects in the field of renewable energy, and we also have a little bit of funding for technical assistance. The work program also defines, and that is important for our info day today, the award criteria against which your proposals in this call will be evaluated. But on the award criteria, I know that Beatrice will address them a bit later, but this is just to say that it's really our work program that has the specific details of how our calls for projects of common interest are operated. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of the different legal instruments that apply to this call. Aside from the EU's general financial rules, you have, of course, the regulation on the Connecting Europe facility, which is an EU fund that supports investments in transport, energy, and digital. And then you have the 10E regulation, the regulation on trans-European networks, and the 5th PCI list, which were just presented by Joachim, which provide the policy context for our infrastructure projects of common interest. Just on the PCI list to add that, of course, in our call for proposals today, being on this 5th PCI list is a prerequisite to apply for this call. I say this because in the past we have had calls for proposals where projects applied that had not PCI status. So today, if you want to apply for this call for proposal, where the deadline is in September, it's really a prerequisite to be on that PCI list, on that 5th list, which was adopted in November 2021. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of budget, the current work program applies for the 3 years 2021, 2022, and 2023. As Joachim already said, there will be a new work program for the remainder of the financial period, which goes until 2027. But this first work program set aside 2.76 billion euros of the total CEF budget. Most of it, the lion's share, is going to projects of common interest, so for trans-European networks. But just to flag that we also have a new window of CEF funding, which is dedicated to these cross-border projects in the field of renewable energy, where it's more or less 15% of this budget that can be granted for these renewable projects under the condition that we have enough applicants and we have enough good projects to fund. And in that case, we can even increase a bit more the budget. But what you need to know today is really that the bulk of our budget under the work program is really for PCIs. And for this call, this was already mentioned, we have a budget of 750 million euros. What are the policy objectives? Next slide, please. That the work program sets for the funding actions. So first, obviously, it's implementation of projects of common interest to make sure that those projects that need it most in terms of making them happen and that are also most strategic from an EU perspective get the funding they need. So CEF is really a last resort option. Projects of common interest already have a lot of advantages that stem from their status, and the Connecting Europe Facility financing is really targeted to those projects that are the most strategic, but also that have the most difficulties in securing financing. So it's really about financing those projects. Beyond that, obviously, our target with the Connecting Europe Facility is to contribute to the EU's 2030 targets of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and of increasing our share of renewable energy. And beyond that, it's about making sure that we fulfill our target to become totally decarbonized, carbon neutral in 2050. Next slide, please. So what do we expect in terms of results from the funding that will be granted under CEF Energy? This is a bit linked, obviously, to the objectives. We want to see projects that help further integrate the EU's internal energy market. We want to see projects that improve on the interoperability of networks between member states. And we also want to see projects realized that facilitate decarbonization, energy efficiency, and that ensure increased security of supply. No surprises here. Next slide, please. Now a word on what is eligible in terms of action. Next slide, please. Now a word on the priorities in 2023. They stem from the objectives and expected results that I also already mentioned. They stem ultimately from our CEF regulation and from the work program. We have a focus on electricity networks, ending isolation of certain regions and member states and removing bottlenecks in the electricity grids. We have a focus on decarbonization of the economy, so to make all those projects happen that will help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But given that it is the last call for proposals for PCIs on natural gas, since we will have a new list next year that will not include natural gas projects anymore in principle. So this is the last call where natural gas PCIs can apply. And obviously we also have a focus on making those projects happen that we still need in order to get a stable and secure system. And this is linked to the Repower EU plan that was adopted last year in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and which is really about increasing the EU's resilience, including by phasing out gas from Russia and by diversifying supply sources and supply routes. This is why we have also priority on this Repower EU objective of increasing our resilience, and this is where gas projects come in. Next slide, please. A word on the co-financing rates. So CEF funding in principle will never cover the entire eligible costs of a project of common interest, of a proposed action, considering that we expect you to attract also funding from other sources. The general rule will be that CEF covers up to 50% of the total eligible costs for studies, for works, but then we have some exceptional rates where we can go up to 75%, for instance, which is the more relevant here, if it's really a project that has very high benefits in terms of security of supply, solidarity within the union, or innovation. But this is really something that you will need to demonstrate in your proposals, that you provide this very high degree of security of supply or innovation. Next slide, please. A word on climate proofing. If you apply for funding for works subject to an environmental impact assessment under the relevant environmental directive, we expect you to take into account the Commission's technical guidance on climate proofing and to address in your proposal how your proposal will address climate change mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions while implementing your infrastructure project, and how to address climate change adaptation, i.e. how to make your project resilient to changes in the climate. All the information you need is found in this technical guidance, and it's also mentioned in the application form. One important thing to flag is this date of the 31st of December 2021. If your environmental impact assessment was completed before the 31st of December 2021, the project is not subject to this requirement. If the EIA was not completed, then we expect you to address this climate proofing. And then my last slide is about what's coming up next, also for your information, because it is not relevant for this current call, but we will be preparing a new multi-annual work program for the years starting in 2024, because the current one will end by the end of this year. This is to take account of a certain number of changes that Joachim already mentioned. We have a new PCI and PMI list coming up next year with new infrastructure categories and where natural gas projects will not be included anymore. So this is something that we have also to reflect in our work program. And also we want to use the occasion obviously to include some feedback and some learning from the experience we had over the first 3 years of this budgetary period of this work program. And so we expect that this work program will be adopted later this year or early next year. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hand back the mic to Beatrice.
Okay. Thank you, Frank, for this very comprehensive presentation. And now we move to the next one, which concerns the evaluation process, the admissibility, eligibility, and the award criteria. If we go to the next slide, and the next again, so evaluation process. First of all, information concerning the timeline of the call. So the call has been open on the 18th of April and will mandatorily close at 17 hours on the 5th of September 23. We intend to conduct the evaluation of proposals between September and December. And in December, we also aim to consult the CEF Coordination Committee and inform the European Parliament. I will present you these steps in a little bit later. And the applicants which are successfully evaluated will be informed around January 24, in fact, sorry, and with the aim to conclude the grant agreement at the latest by June 2024. So what are the steps and the principles of the evaluation and the selection process? First of all, for the proposals which have been submitted, we will conduct what we call the preliminary checks, so the admissibility and eligibility check, and I will describe in a moment what are the criteria for passing these checks successfully. These checks will be conducted by CINEA, internal staff. Then we will, the proposal successfully in the first phase will go to the second phase, which is what we call the external evaluation, where we ask the support of external independent experts, which evaluate some of the award criteria. That goes through a process where there is an individual assessment and a consensus process, consensus meetings, which are moderated by CINEA staff. And the last step of this process is done internally in the Commission at DG ENER, where there is an evaluation committee which finalizes the evaluation and comes with a recommended draft list of proposals, where also, let's say, the maximum budgetary amount per proposals is fixed. Through all this entire process, we also have to make sure that there is compliance with the selection criteria and also overall all the steps with the European EU law. The final stage, the next slide, please, of the selection process is that following the internal committee, there is preparation of a selection decision with an inter-service consultation inside the European Commission. And then, as I mentioned already, this what we call a draft selection decision is consulted formally with member states representative under the CEF Coordination Committee. Afterwards, let's say, there is information of the Parliament and the formal adoption of the selection decision, which again is the legal basis for the finalization of the grant agreement and signing the grant agreement, which will be done by CINEA, also following, of course, the information to applicants. I will present also some info on that at the end of the presentation. Let's move now to the first phase of the selection process, so the admissibility and the eligibility. So, admissibility. You will receive, and there were already some questions on Slido, you will receive all the presentations, all the PowerPoint, so I will not now read all the points, you will have it all, but here is just perhaps to highlight some important points. So the deadline of the call is 5th of September 23 at 17 p.m. So make sure you are really, let's say, in time to submit your proposals. The submission is electronic via the funding and tender portal. And in order, let's say, to be considered admissible, the proposal must be complete and contain all the requested information and documents and annexes. My colleague Bianca, in the second part of the presentation, will provide you with let's say, very comprehensive overview of the documents, so please pay attention to that. We will not follow up for missing elements. And also, let's say, there is a limit to the maximum number of pages of the application, so maximum 120 pages. We will not consider additional ones. So I'll present now a couple of slides concerning, because we have always some number of questions concerning some of these documents, particularly some annexes. I also want to mention that in the funding portal you have already a comprehensive list of FAQs, so if you're not sure you can go in the funding portal and check them. But here, let's say, just to highlight a few points. So one concerns a mandatory document which is called Agreement by the Concerned Member State of Letter of Support. So here it's a form that must be duly signed. It must be provided by all applicants, but what is important is that the member state support, the member state in relation here is not the member state of the applicant, but is the member state where the proposed action is supposed to be implemented. So here, for example, if we have applicants established in Sweden and Finland, and the action is in Sweden and Finland, that we require support of both Sweden and Finland. But if we have, for example, an applicant from Belgium, and your action is expected to be implemented in the Netherlands, then we don't want the support of Belgium as a member state, but we will ask you the letter of the member state authority in the Netherlands. And also, and there are also some exceptions, if an action is supposed to be implemented outside the EU, still we will, like here the example of Norway, still we will need the support required from an EU member state for which, let's say, there is expected an impact of the action implementation. The next slide. Again, we also always receive some questions concerning this file, which is called environmental compliance. So as I said, you need to ensure that your application is compliant with EU law, and one important aspect relates to the compliance with environmental EU law. So you need to provide a file of environmental compliance. This is mandatory for both works and studies. For works and studies with physical intervention, there are some boxes to be filled in. For studies without physical intervention, let's say the form is a little bit more easier, but it is mandatory in any case for all the applications. Next one, another, let's say, mandatory document, also for all application, relates to what we call the 10E compliance form. So it is a form which relates to the compliance of the applicant, so of the project promoter, of the PCI, with the EU law on energy infrastructure. It's enough if that form, you will find it in the funding portal, is signed by the promoter and not by the member state. The next slide. So there are also, let's say, additional mandatory documents. So we will also need your latest PCI annual report, so for projects of common interest, in accordance with Article 5.4 of the 10E regulation. Is what we call the report to ACER, which is available for majority of PCI categories. So if you have that, in particular for electricity and gas projects, you are expected to provide this as well. And other important documents relate to the annual activity reports and list of previous projects, because they are, and we will come to that in a moment, they are requested in order to verify if as an applicant or beneficiary you have sufficient operational capacities. There are some exceptions to that. Public bodies, member state, and certified TSO, they don't need these reports. We don't need anything specific to be prepared for the proposal. It's just what you prepare, let's say, on a regular basis for your board, for the public, for your shareholders. Okay, this concludes the presentation of admissibility criteria and some questions. Let's go now to the eligibility. So we repeat again the message. It was presented by Joachim. It was repeated by Frank. So here we have an eligibility of the scope of your activities. So only if the activities you propose relate to the PCIs of the 5th PCI list, so the PCI list which is in force as for the Commission the delegated regulation adopted in November 2021, then these activities are eligible. Anything that goes beyond or outside these PCIs, then these activities will not be eligible. You see that as it was mentioned, studies and works are eligible under these calls, and here you have an overview, let's say, of let's say what we mean for studies and what we mean for works in the meaning of CEF Energy. So you can go through this definition if you are not sure, let's say, whether what you want to propose relates to studies of works. Basically, studies is more the activities needed to prepare the PCI implementation, and works relates more to development, construction, installation activities of your project. This to make it really, let's say, very blunt. There are not only conditions for the eligibility of the scope of the activities, but also there are eligibility conditions for the applicants. So eligible applicants, all this is written very well in the call. They must be legal entities. They must be established in one of the eligible countries, which are EU member states, or a specific list on non-EU countries. We will ask, let's say, also some to register in the participant register in order for us to verify, let's say, really the validity of your legal entity. And so you will have at some point you will be requested, if you are selected, to upload documents showing the legal status and origin. I mentioned at the beginning that we have, let's say, applicants have to comply with operational capacity. And what does it mean? Basically, applicants have to demonstrate that they have the know-how, the qualification, and resources to successfully implement the project. The applicants, again, will have to show the capacity through the description, to the applicant's activity report, and the list of previous projects, and there are some exemptions to that. Another, let's say, important check that we do is what we call the financial capacity check. Next slide, please. So again, another important point is that the applicants, they have to demonstrate to have the resources to successfully implement the project. So how we do that? We will carry out what we call a financial capacity check for the applicants or beneficiaries which are selected successfully at the evaluation, or they are in a reserve list. And then, let's say, this is a point when we will start the grant preparation. So it is nothing that happens, let's say, immediately when you want to submit your proposal. It's done at a later stage if you are successfully evaluated. Again, this check is done normally for all beneficiaries except public bodies or international organizations or TSOs, which are exempted, or if individual grant requested amount is less than 60,000 euro. Let's go then now to the, let's say, other important part of the selection process, which is the award criteria. So the call for proposal describes 5 award criteria against which your proposal will be evaluated. There is a qualitative evaluation and there is a quantitative, let's say, score associated to it with, let's say, a minimum pass score of 3, so it's a range from 0 to 5, a minimum pass score of 3 and a maximum score of 15 must be obtained under each award criteria in order to be successfully selected, and there is an overall pass score of a minimum of 15. These criteria are priority and urgency, maturity, quality, impact, and catalytic effect. So what does it mean? It means that, let's say, when you will present your application, you will have to submit a number of information, in particular under the application form, and my colleagues will describe it in more detail in the second part of the info day. So they will have a lot of boxes where you will have, let's say, to fill a lot of tests, provide potentially also other additional documents, and is where, let's say, you will have to make your case for a application to receive a CEF grant. And now we will go through a bit all the information, what is required under each award criteria, and I'll try to explain it in a short way. So the first award criterion is priority and urgency. And this brings back to the presentation made by Frank on what are the priority under, let's say, this particular call of PCI 2023, and what are, let's say, the general policy objectives and policy targets, and how really your proposal contributes to that. So here, you will see we will ask you to demonstrate how this proposed action will contribute to the sectoral policy objectives, and in particular, to the EU 2030 climate and energy targets. You will have to indicate how your proposed action contributes to market integration. Of course, we're talking about energy market integration, including through ending energy isolation or implementation of the energy internal market. In view also of the policy priorities, it will be good to indicate if your project contributes to eliminating electricity interconnection bottlenecks, and if necessary, how it achieves the interconnection, how it, let's say, helps to the achievement of the interconnection targets in electricity and the synchronization of electricity systems with EU networks. You will find also, let's say, some boxes in the application form, and they relate to the possible synergies between, let's say, your application with other sectors. So how your action contributes, let's say, also to, let's say, other sector, in particular transport and digital sector. And here, let's say, you will have to make a case whether, let's say, the implementation of your project will significantly improve the socioeconomic, climate, and environmental benefits of the proposed action by implementing these synergies. So it's not for all projects, but there could be, let's say, some where this aspect might be relevant, so you're required to make your case also there. You will also find in the application form that you will have to submit information on how you consider the EU added value of your project. It's good to fill this information. The call for proposals also stipulates that the EU added value of an action which is related to a PCI is in a way demonstrated by the PCI status itself. So let me say that you don't need to worry very much about that project, but it's good, let's say, to fill it in a very, let's say, also in a good way. If we move to the second criterion, that's the maturity criterion. So here, basically, what we want to understand and what we will assess is basically how the activities of your project are they ready to start and to be financed by this call. So it's assessing the maturity of the project also in the context of the PCI development. So not, let's say, technical and financial maturity as such, but how it fits, let's say, in the development of your PCI. So here the maturity is divided, let's say, in two parts. So we have a technical maturity part and a financial maturity. So in the technical maturity, you will have to provide information about what have you already done in terms of preparatory steps and what can be carried out without delay. You will have to, let's say, also justify how the project is really the next step in the PCI implementation, and whether, let's say, really the project is mature enough to be financed under this call. So the activities you want to propose, they must happen imminently. For this, you will have to provide information on your PCI annual report, which will be scrutinized, but what are the procurement procedures which are needed, if there are contracts which are already awarded, and what is planned. And for works, there are additional requirements such as a summary of public consultation and also the permits, information about authorization, approval, and permits. In terms of financial maturity, for works proposal, there will be a specific section. You will see that, let's say, you have to provide information on estimation on financial viability of your project, what are financial commitments which are already been taken or they are in the process of being taken, including information on rates of return and NPV, and explain efforts to secure other sources of funding. So CEF should not be the only, let's say, funding that you are requested. And we will come to that in a moment again. The third award criterion relates to quality. So that's a bit of a classical award criterion, let me say. So it's a quality of the implementation plan of your project that is proposed. And it's also, let's say, a quality of your proposal overall. But there are, let's say, specific points you should focus to describe. So it's really, let's say, in order to have a sound implementation plan, you will need to describe and convincingly that you have the resources needed to implement the project and provide evidence that the project is correctly sized. You will have to provide information on the organizational structure and cooperation between applicants, about project management and risk management methods and procedures, and also very important, the risk assessment. Let me also stress that we have a provision in the call that for what concerns project management, we have a threshold on the cost. So the cost should not exceed 10% of total project cost, because we believe that that should be really the maximum threshold of for project management for the type of projects that we expect for works and studies. So the next slide, we go to a work criterion, which is, let's say, quite complex because it has different, let's say, sub-elements. So one relates to the externalities. The other element relates to the climate and environmental impact involving for works proposals. The third element relates to the need to overcome financial obstacles, such as those generated by insufficient commercial viability. And the fourth element concerns for works the cross-border dimension of your project. So it's quite, let's say, a complex award criterion, and we try to divide in these sub-elements. So let's start maybe with the first one, externalities. So externalities for grant for works, so for works proposal, is a crucial part in the assessment, because only as per CINEA regulation, only projects which have a significant degree of externalities can be, let's say, provided grant for works. So in the call, you will also see that we have a threshold, so that even, let's say, even if this criterion is composed by different elements, if we believe that in the evaluation we assess that you don't have a sufficient degree of positive externalities, immediately, let's say, the score of this award criterion will be below the threshold of 3. So let's go quickly to say which are the positive externalities. They are defined in the CINEA regulation, so we will only consider here externalities in terms of security of supply, innovation, and solidarity among member states. So no other externalities will be assessed. So for security of supply, you have to quantify the positive impact of solidarity at the regional level and even going beyond the involved member states. For solidarity, we will ask you to quantify the impact for both constructing and non-constructing countries as necessary. So in particular to what concerns change to the tariff and commodity price. And for what concerns innovation, you will have to demonstrate what are the benefits of the technology you want to implement compared to a conventional solution, and also whether the results would be replicable. Now, because, let's say, externalities, the assessment of externality plays such an important role in the assessment of the proposal and overall also in relation to the requested co-funding rate, you will have to specify the extent, also quantify, as we said, and in case really you believe, let's say, that these significant externalities, let's say, are the basis for claiming a co-funding rate higher than 50%, then you will need really a detailed justification of what is so exceptional, what are the exceptional circumstances for you, let's say, to claim to claim this funding amount. So the second aspect on the criterion impact relates to the environmental and climate impact for works proposal. So this is also divided into parts. You will find in the application form all, let's say, the boxes which are related to that. So one part we relate to a description for what concerns the climate impact in particular. We relate to a description. You should provide a description on, let's say, what are mitigation measures in the implementation of the project, and in particular, what are, for example, the cost, how the cost of greenhouse gas emission has been integrated in the economic evaluation of your PCI, how it is consistent with emission targets, what are mitigation measures for climate. And the second point relates to the climate proofing of the infrastructure. So, and Frank explained that, let's say, there is also a technical guidance on the climate proofing and on the climate, let's say, mitigation that you should refer to, if applicable. Do not forget also that environmental impact of your project is also important, so you will also have to describe how, let's say, the environmental protection, how this is ensured in the implementation of the project. The third point in the impact, can we go back? Sorry, is relates to basically, let's say, the financial obstacles. And so the need to overcome financial obstacles, such as those generated by insufficient commercial viability, high upfront cost, or lack of market finance. So here, in this, under this criterion, you really have to explain all of this. So do you really have financial obstacles that prevent you from bringing your project forward? And would public funding would help to overcome them? For works proposals, there is also a section on the potential revenues of your project once implemented that must be filled in. So you will see also in the proposal the degree of, let's say, explanation that we want to receive for works and studies proposal is different. Of course, for works proposals, we are requesting much more information, also in terms of, let's say, what I referred to initially on the financial maturity, because we expect, let's say, that your project is getting really close to the financial close to the real, let's say, construction. So your presentation, let's say, of the financial package for your project, including CBCA and business plan, should be already, let's say, be prepared and should be, let's say, well mature, and the explanation on financial obstacles should be, let's say, very well elaborated. For studies, we understand that your project might be at, let's say, maybe an early phase, a preparatory phase, so we can recognize that there might not be, let's say, perhaps, let's say, enough level of maturity for the presentation of financial obstacles, but still really we require a solid qualitative information on that. And that brings me to the last part of the impact criterion that is related to relevant for works proposals, and that's the cross-border dimension, in which, let's say, we will ask you to provide information on the area of impact of your project, which are the member states concerned, how the member states and the promoters cooperate, and also if there is a financial contribution by member states and promoters as per the cross-border cost allocation decision. There might be, let's say, that the impact of your project goes beyond let's say, member states or countries where the action takes place. So if that is relevant, you can also provide this information. And last but not least, we move to the last award criterion, which is the catalytic effect. So that's really a very, very important one, because here is really where you as an applicant, you have to make a solid case that really the CEF grant will make the positive difference to the action in terms of facilitating and accelerating the implementation. So here, let me remind the presentation of Joachim and Frank. So we know from TENI regulation that grants for works, particularly here for works proposals, they are really the last resort for getting to, let's say, for getting to the implementation, the financial closure of your project. So you will have really to demonstrate, in particular for grant for works, what is really, why it is so crucial that CEF grant will make a positive difference. And you will also have to demonstrate that is really this last resort, so that you have tried everything in terms, of trying to, let's say, find other financial resources for your project, but that it's really, let's say, not, they are really, let's say, not viable. And therefore, let's say, there is still a funding gap, so to say, which is needed in terms, let's say, to close the financing for this project. So overall, for both CEF grants for works, but also for CEF studies, let me stress that, your application has to convincingly demonstrate the need for EU funds. So you really have to make this, let's say, demonstration very, very strong, provide all the evidence that you have, in particular, provide also the evidence of the efforts that you are doing to mobilize other, let's say, other sources, and whether, let's say, maybe CEF grant will help, let's say, also in that sense, to mobilize other public and private sources of financing. So you have to explain really all the difficulties with clear evidence in obtaining other sources of financing, market finance, and therefore make your case how the grant can help to overcome this shortage, and make really your case that, let's say, there might not be a stimulating effect of the grant if, for example, all the costs are included already in the tariffs and there are, let's say, no real risks, let's say, with the project promoter. So this is, in a nutshell, closes the award criteria presentation. And let's move really to the last slide, which concerns the evaluation results and what happens when, we have submitted your proposal, we have evaluated, and you are, let's say, we have closed really the evaluation phase. So independent on whether, let's say, you are successful or not, all proposals will be informed with a letter via the participant portal about the evaluation result. So successful proposal in that letter will be invited to prepare a grant preparation with our EU project officer in CINEA, by CINEA. The other ones might be put on a reserve list, or they will be, let's say, rejected. Let me stress that if you are invited to a grant preparation, this is not a formal commitment for funding. As I explained initially, there are still, let's say, some legal and financial checks that we have to carry out. So legal entity validation, the financial capacity check, exclusion check, and then we will go, let's say, really, we hope, let's say, with our colleagues, you will be really able to, once these checks are successful, to finalize the grant agreement in line with the evaluation results. If you are not successful and you believe that the evaluation procedure was flawed, you can submit a complaint. The procedure will be described in the evaluation result letter. Then there are not only procedures, but also with specific deadlines, and we will then, CINEA will then review the evaluation and provide a further, let's say, results to you. So I think that is all. So I know it was a very long presentation. Thanks for bearing with me, and also thanks for listening so far. We hope that that already clarified a lot of questions you had, but now we are opening the Q&A sessions, because we have already some questions that we have received. So I can maybe take the first one, if I understand correctly, on what are the conditions for internal reinforcement projects that qualify as PCI to be granted CEF grant studies and works. Well, if we understand the question correctly, if you are already, let's say, a PCI in the 5th PCI list, then you can apply for studies and works. There are, as I explained, some conditions in particular for works that must be respected. But as such, let's say whether, I mean, any PCI in principle, subject, let's say, to specific condition, can apply. So you must be in the 5th PCI list to be able to apply. If we are relating, let's say, to other projects that are not in the 5th PCI list, then you cannot apply. So I hope that that was, let's say, the explanation. I don't know if my colleagues want to complement or that's enough. Participants from UK eligible, projects by EU members, but with project infrastructures located in the UK. Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, so yes, well, there are some conditions for applicants which are that are outside the EU for participation. So, participation of these third country applicants is under the condition that their participation and their funding is indispensable for the achievement of the objectives of a project of common interest. So, let's say a UK participant has to be, let's say, an applicant in relation, let's say, first of all, to a PCI, and it will be then determined whether the participation and the funding of this UK applicant is really indispensable for the achievement of an implementation of this PCI. So that's the condition for third country applicants and therefore also UK. And please.
Maybe to add, because I don't know if this is part of your question, but you need to be on the PCI list. So the first thing is really to check the PCI list where we have provided the link and whether the project is on it. So project infrastructure is located in the UK. I mean, the UK has left the European Union. At some point we had projects on the UK, on the PCI list, but really it's the entry point is to check whether your project has PCI status according to this list. And from that, everything else follows.
Do you support energy storage or liquefaction, gasification, or liquid hydrogen? I think here the reply is that, well, in order to be eligible, you have to, let's say, present activities which, as I explained, relate to a project of common interest under the 5th PCI list. And let's say hydrogen, it's not hydrogen, let's say, infrastructure are not part, let's say, of infrastructure which is eligible under the 5th PCI list. So as it was explained by Joachim, the new list which is in preparation will refer to hydrogen projects, but for the time being, this call relates to the 5th PCI list where we don't have any PCIs that relate to hydrogen. So we cannot support this type of activities now. Okay. What is this? Should I conduct? What is RFI? You take it? Yeah. Okay. Ona.
Hello from my side. So I'll try to reply to this question. It might be a bit cryptic. So if you don't get the reply you expect, please clarify again. However, from the question that I understand, that the process. So first of all, you really need, as Frank said, to check whether your proposed project is a PCI. And if you determine that it is, and you want to apply for studies, you need to see what is the eligibility of the costs. So according to the call text, the costs are eligible to be reimbursed if you are successful as of the date when the application is lodged. So if you have already procurement done for the given studies, bear in mind the cost eligibility for the procurement as long as you want to have the cost related to procurement reimbursed. The actual costs for this for the studies, of course, are not the procurement cost of like a tender. But if, for example, and I give here an example, you want to have an environmental impact assessment done, which is a CEF study, CEF-funded study, you already have a contractor to do that study. And you launched the application, let's say, today. So today will be the day when the costs become eligible, and the costs are the real costs. So they should be based on the services provided. Let's say in 1 month, your contractor comes back with the first draft of a study. So as of today, in 1 month time, these costs are eligible. I hope that, as I said, the question that you had, please clarify in Slido if you need additional aspect.
CEF work application include 2 blocks for which final investment decisions will be taken at 2 different dates. Well, maybe as a general disclaimer, you know, it is a bit your responsibility to make the case for, let's say, for your CEF application, and to best, let's say, describe also how you are going to, you know, implement also your project. So let me say that you should not, I mean, this, what you prepare and what you submit to us should really, you know, be a realistic plan for your project, and it should not be, let's say, done with the purpose to, you know, get a better CEF application. Perhaps I misunderstood that, but let's say if the question is really, can we have the 2 blocks, let's say I would leave this really up to the applicant to take this decision how they want to prepare that application. But in principle, we do not exclude that.
I want to compliment as well the first comment that please, all applicants are very much advised to consult frequently asked questions section under the call, because there we already have a good number of replies to the potential questions which we received in previous calls and which are still valid here. And I suspect that there might be a good point also to do this check for the person who asked this question. And second comment I want to make is referring to what actually Beatrice already said before on the award criteria. Please make sure that the maturity part is actually very well covered under the so-called blocks that you are referring to.
Perhaps this, Frank, you want to take? How can we join the PCI list? I mean, we have, in any case, the link of the PCI list is in. You want? Yeah. So the question is in 2 parts. Where can we find the PCI list? So for the purpose of this call, if you go to the funding portal, let's say among the relevant links, when you go, let's say, to the web page of this call for proposal, you will also find the link of the current PCI list. For the second question, I refer to Frank.
I provided an answer already on Slido, but indeed, you need to to obtain PCI status to be eligible for calls for proposals like this. The PCI lists process for the next list, which is to be adopted in November 2023, is already closed. And if you want to join the PCI lists that will be adopted 2 years later in 2025, there the process has not started yet, but we will publish in due course when this next selection process will start.
So for cross-border projects that may involve the TSO of the other country, do we have to submit the application with this entity? So if you have a project with, let's say, 2 TSO in 2 different countries, if your application relates to, let's say, yes, activities which should be jointly carried out, or that should be carried out by one and the other TSO, then we advise you to submit the application together with the other TSO. But it's possible that I mean, you might have, let's say, to implement some activities related to the PCI alone, or in, let's say, in your country, that do not involve the other TSO. So you are not obliged, in this case, to submit the application with this entity, with the other, let's say, TSO of the other country. Let me remind the point concerning the cross-border cooperation, the cross-border dimension. So that's an element of the work criteria where we will have to evaluate how you cooperate, let's say, how different, let's say, TSOs or project promoter cooperate if the project is, let's say, to be implemented with more than one applicant. So what are, let's say, the cross-border aspects of cooperation, how member states cooperate, how TSOs cooperate. So all of this, even if you are want to apply alone, all of this should be also well described in the application. If a member state has no projects, well, they can apply. Yeah. So if a member state has 2 PCI projects in a cluster of competing PCIs, and one of them was approved for financing in December, could the second one apply under this call? Yes, you can apply as long as you are a PCI in the 5th PCI list. I mean, there is no relationship. Yeah.
I want to compliment here that, again, please check the award criteria which were brilliantly described by Beatrice in earlier presentation, because your application or your proposed project will need to meet the criterion, for example, priority and urgency, which was also described. So in that sense, any application needs to have a very clear, thorough look into the award criteria, and the, let's say, proof of a burden is on your side. So you need to make sure that you meet those award criteria.
Thank you. So I think we close now the first part of the questions. We see that there are other questions in Slido which have been received, but they relate more to the second part of the program. So we suggest that you stay patient, and we will take these additional questions relating to costs and payments in the second part, because this will be described later on. So thank you for staying with us so far. Thank you for your interest. We have now a short coffee break. We are actually in very good time, and we'll be back at 11:15. Thank you very much. See you in a moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello, good morning again, and welcome to our second block of the Information Day for the CEF Energy PCI Call for Proposals 2023. My name is Juan de Miguel Salanova. I'm the Head of Sector in Natural Gas and CO2 Networks in the CEF Energy unit at CINEA. So we are going to start now the second block of sessions of this Info Day. We will have several sessions covering important aspects of our call for proposals, important information for you as potential applicants for this call. And before starting with the presentations, I would like to remind that you can participate by sending your questions in Slido, hashtag CEF Energy PCIs, in case you have questions on the proposals that are going to be presented, on the presentations that are going to be made. You can submit your questions there, and you will have all the presentations available after this event on the page of the event on CINEA website. So I would invite you to consult all the information also after the Info Day, which will be available there. In this second block of sessions, we will have several presentations by some of my colleagues. First of all, my colleague Bianca Holford will be presenting will be helping you to prepare a successful proposal. She will be giving you very useful hints and tips to prepare a good application and to become successful and be selected for funding. After her, my colleague Ona Kostinete-Grinkevicene will present the main aspects of the budget management from proposals. So she will be giving you important information on how to fill out information on the budget of your project in the proposal. After that, my colleague Giulia Fraschetti will be explaining to you the main parts and provisions of the CEF2 grant agreements that those applicants which will be successful will have to sign with CINEA. And she will remind you some of the most important obligations that you will have as beneficiaries of our program, and also the rights that you will have as beneficiaries. And last but not least, my colleague Gloria Balilari will make a presentation on the submission module. So she will explain how you have to actually, in practice, prepare and submit your proposal in the e-grant system. So please stay until the end, because that final presentation will also be a very important one from a practical point of view on how to prepare and submit your application. And to conclude, we will have again a Q&A session where we will cover any incoming questions that you may have on these presentations or the ones made this morning. And we will try to reply to all the questions now within this session. Before we conclude. So without any further introduction, I will then hand it over to my colleague Bianca Holford, project manager in our unit B4 CEF Energy, for her presentation on how to prepare a successful proposal. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you, Juan, for that introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bianca Holford, and I am project advisor at CINEA. In my presentation today, I will be walking you through how to prepare a successful presentation, and I'll be providing you with some tips and examples. Now, before I actually start my presentation, I'd like to tell you that this presentation actually makes much more sense if you have already familiarized yourselves with the templates. So my number one tip is, please either watch this presentation again or have a copy of it near you when you're actually preparing your presentation, your proposal, sorry. So these are the topics, can you go, yes, thank you. So these are the topics that I'm going to be addressing today. First of all, I'm going to be starting by talking a little bit about terminology and clarifying a couple of terms which are essential for you to understand. I'll then go on to talking about the quality of the proposal and what aspects make a proposal good. I'll be giving you several tips and examples. And I will be finishing my presentation with an applicant's checklist. So these are the things that you have to make sure your proposal contains before you click that final submit button. Okay, so I'd like to start off by clarifying some pretty basic terminology, which we find causes some confusion in the proposals that we have seen. So let me start off by explaining PCI. You should all know this, of course. It's a project of common interest. So it's an energy infrastructure project located on one of the 11 priority corridors. An example of a PCI is Green Switch 10.12. Now, this term is often confused with the term project, which is interchangeably used with the word action. So what is a project exactly? So project means any activity which has been identified as financially and technically independent, has a set time frame, and is necessary for the implementation of a project. So a project can actually be a part of a PCI. And there will be parts of the application form where you are expected to write about the PCI, and there will be parts where you're expected to write about the project. So really make sure you understand what the distinction is. We then have the term work package. So a work package is a major subdivision of your project. An example of a work package is, for instance, project management or the preparation of a detailed design and tender documents. So work packages can run in parallel to each other, or they can be sequential. Another term which is useful to understand and not to make a confusion with is a task. So a task is basically a contract, but what I'll do is I'll run you through this template. So this is part B of the application form, where you are expected to describe your work package. So for instance, for works, you have the construction of an overhead line between part section A and section B. And then at the bottom, you are expected to list your tasks. So your tasks are your contracts. And you will see on the right-hand column, where you see the word yes and 100%. Here is where we expect you to provide the percentage of subcontracting that will be taking place for that task. Another important distinction has to be made between milestone and deliverable. So a milestone is a major control point in the project that helps you to chart progress. I particularly like this diagram on the right-hand side because I think it illustrates what a milestone is very nicely. So imagine the timeline of your project and you have pit stops marked in yellow, green, and so on. These are your control points. So an example of a milestone would be the publication of a tender or the signature of a contract. A deliverable, on the other hand, is different to a milestone. It's a tangible outcome. It's a project output. So, for example, final detailed design would be a deliverable, or a building permit would be a deliverable. Okay, well, having bombarded you with all these terms, let's have a think about how they all come together so that it makes sense to you. So it's like building a house. Let's keep it very simple. You need a solid foundation to build your project. Your solid foundation is the PCI list, the 5th PCI list in this case, where you are eligible to apply for funding. The structure of your house is your project. Within your project or your house, you have windows and doors, and these are your work packages. Within your work packages, you have your tasks, which are your contracts, and you have your milestones. And your final deliverable is your house. It's a final constructed infrastructure of your house. That is your deliverable. So now let's shift our attention to thinking a little bit about what affects the quality of your proposal. So the first question to ask yourself is, who is actually going to read your application? Apart from the colleagues at CINEA, who will be checking for completeness, and the colleagues at DG ENER, who look at the policy aspects, you have, of course, the evaluators. Now, the evaluators will have many proposals to evaluate on the same day or in the same week. They are usually not native English speakers, which means that the clearer you write, the better it is. And they may have a limited background on your proposed project. What this means is that they may not have all the details. It doesn't mean that they're not experts in the field, of course, but they may not have all the information about your project. So don't take any information for granted. So I'd like to invite you to think about what is it that a reader is actually looking for when they read your proposal. And there are a couple of aspects which sound very simple, but it's worth reflecting upon them. And the first one is use simple language. Make sure you're concise, avoid using jargon, and make sure that any background knowledge is not taken for granted. The second point, be clear and be specific. Make sure you clearly demonstrate how your proposal addresses the award criteria. Make sure the information you provide is also specific and clear, and that no assumptions or requests for additional information will be made. And this is a very important point to bear in mind. No additional information will be requested. So you have one shot at this. Make sure you provide all the information in a concise manner first time round. Something else which affects the quality of your proposal is, of course, consistency. What do I mean by this? Well, make sure the information in one part of the application form matches the information in another part of the application form. So if you make reference to any annexes, make sure that the annexes are numbered correctly and make sure that the information is actually there so that the evaluators don't waste time looking for this information. Make sure that the Gantt chart is consistent with your work packages dates, with your milestones, with your deliverables. Make sure that the information is presented in a logical way and do not repeat yourself. Avoid repetitions. I'm going to give you an example of what consistency looks like. So administrative procedures should be presented in a chronological order in your work package. What does this mean? The EIA should precede the permit for construction. So there has to be an internal logic and a consistency to the information that you provide. Now let's have a think about what affects the scope of your proposal. And these are questions, and as I go along the slides, they may seem quite repetitive, but they're done intentionally. You should ask yourselves these questions over and over again to make sure that you're getting your message across. So for instance, what is your project about? Make sure you clearly describe what it is that you're doing. Is it the construction of an overhead line? Is it a feasibility study? Make sure that you provide technical parameters on the project. For example, it's an 100 kilometers of 320 kV double circuit overhead line between section X and section Y. Make sure these details are all presented clearly in your proposal. And again, make sure that your work packages, your tasks, your milestones, and your deliverables make sense and are related to your project. Next, please. Other questions to ask yourselves is who is actually carrying out the project? Are the tasks going to be carried out by internal and external resources? Perhaps it's a mixture of the two. Make sure that you are well aware and know in advance the subcontracting per work package. So this comes back to the tasks that I described in one of my first slides, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. But make sure that in advance you are aware and you can detail your tasks. And make it clear, what are the expected results of the project? What are you actually trying to achieve? When thinking about your work packages in particular, make sure that the objectives are clear. So for example, make sure that your work package name actually matches the description. This will provide clarity to the reader, and it will be just easier to understand what it is that you're doing. And I repeat once more, make sure that your tasks, milestones, and deliverables are all consistent with each other and make sense. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the milestones and the milestone table, because this can be quite tricky to fill in sometimes, and we see that often we get either very long lists of milestones or milestones are completely misunderstood and they're confused with deliverables. So Here we have 3 basic rules of thumb for your milestones. The first one is that each work package should have at least 2 milestones. So 1 milestone marking the start of your work package and 1 milestone marking the end of your work package. For work packages that last more than a year, you should have a milestone every 12 months. It doesn't necessarily have to be every 12 months. The point here is that you should have intermediate milestones if you have a work package that lasts 4 years, for instance. And we'll be having a look at examples in a minute. And thirdly, make sure that your means of verification are reliable and realistic, so they make sense and relate clearly to your milestones. So here we have an example of Part B of your application form, where you're expected to provide milestones for a work package. So we have an imaginary work package 1, which is a preparation and submission of planning application to the competent authority. And you will see that it has a duration of 12 months, which is marked by M1 and M12. Now, I'm reading the table from left to right. So you'll see that milestone 1 is the start of the preparation of the planning, and it relates to work package 1. We have a description for what that milestone is, and we have a start date. The start date is the 1st of January 2023, marked by milestone 1. Now, as this work package lasts 12 months, we also have an end milestone. So again, reading from left to right, we have milestone 2, and we have the submission of the planning application, and we have month 12, ending on the 31st of December 2023. And of course, on the right-hand column, we have the means of verification, which relate quite closely to the description of the milestone. So this is a basic example, which could be for a study, for instance. Now let's look at a more complicated example of a milestone table, where we have a work package that lasts 24 months. So again, you see at the top, work package 1 is the construction between section X and Y, and it lasts for 24 months, which is marked by M1 to M24. Starting from the left, as you can see once again, we have milestone 1, 2, and 3. And if we skip to the due dates, which is what I'd like you to focus on now, we have a milestone marking the beginning of the work package. We have an intermediate milestone, which is some 12 months later, and we have the end milestone. So this is basically the logic that we would like you to apply when you put your work packages and your milestone table together. There are also other aspects of a proposal preparation to keep in mind, and public procurement in particular is a very important one. So please note that all contracts must comply with EU law. So this means sound financial management, best value for money, no conflict of interest, and so on and so forth. Depending on your status, whether you're public or private, you should check which directive applies to you. So in advance of preparing your proposal, make sure you know what public procurement directives or rules apply to you. Not only make sure you know, but be aware that you will have to list them in your tasks, and I will talk about that again in the next slide. Also important to bear in mind, sorry, if you could come back just one, sorry. Also important to bear in mind that once funding is awarded, procurement is verified at the payment stage, and non-compliance to procurement could lead to the rejection of costs. Okay, so let's look at public procurement a little bit more in depth within Part B of the application form. So on the left-hand side, under the section on maturity, we expect you to present the past, present, and future public procurement activities that you are expecting or have carried out. On the right-hand side of the slide, you will see a template which I showed earlier on, and I refer back to the tasks. So the tasks are your contracts, and here's where you will be listing your subcontracting and providing us with a percentage of subcontracting per task. Similarly, also under Part B of the application form, under the section on maturity, you will be expected to provide information on permitting. And here you'll be asked to provide past, present, and future information as well. Also make sure that the justification of the resources that you are asking for makes sense. I'll give you an example. Imagine you have a large works project where you will be doing a lot of tendering. Will you need half a person working part-time to carry out these tasks, or will you need a team of 3 people? So think about the kind of resources that you will need, because these are things that the evaluators will be looking at and paying close attention to. As Beatrice mentioned in her presentation, I remind you again, project management costs should not exceed 10% of the total project costs. Also, when it comes to resources, make sure that there is clarity on the decision-making processes, that the readiness of the company to implement the project is clearly shown. Make sure that you show that the team, the accountancy, the financial controlling, and so on, are already in place and are well established. Lastly, the risk table is obviously also a very important part of the application form and something you should pay close attention to. This part falls under quality. And as you can see, again, reading from left to right, you are expected to provide the risks which you believe your project could suffer, a description of what these risks are, the work packages to which they relate to, and you are expected to propose risk mitigating measures and the likelihood at which they are possibly going to occur, so high, medium, or low. I'd also like to draw your attention to something else on this slide, and this is to the gray area. So we have risk assessment grid, and we have some wording there, a small paragraph in italics. This paragraph in italics you will see throughout the application form, and this is basically guidance on how to fill in the tables. I really recommend that you read this very carefully, because it gives you an excellent explanation of what is expected from you. So don't skip it. Don't read just the title. Read what it is that we are asking you for. In the end, it's not a competition of how much you write. It's more about how concise you are, how precise you are. So actually, the message I'm trying to convey to you is very simple, and I've repeated myself over and over again. Ask yourselves, whilst you prepare the proposal, did I clearly answer the questions that are being asked? Have I written it in a clear and complete and concise way? Is it an easy read? Think about who's going to be reading it. Have I provided coherent information? Is it specific enough? So keep on asking yourselves these questions over and over again. Once you've finished your application form, there are several points which you should check before you press the submit button. And these are all very important points. So I have a checklist here, and like I said, I really suggest that you have a copy of this in front of you when you're preparing your proposal. So the first point on the applicant's checklist is the scope. Ask yourself, does the proposal fit the scope of the call that you are applying for? Check the call text. Secondly, and perhaps one of the most important ones, Beatrice also mentioned it, the deadline. Are you on track to submit your proposal on the 5th of September? Have you managed to secure all the documents on time? We highly recommend that you don't leave anything for the last day, because there could be technical issues. You might have forgotten to fill something in. Don't leave it for the last moment. And lastly, pay attention to the time. This is Central European time, so 5 o'clock, 5 p.m. Brussels time. If you're in Lisbon, this time will be different. So make sure you think about these things to give yourselves enough time and to give yourselves a good chance to prepare and to submit a good proposal. Next, please. So here is basically the list of documents that are mandatory for you to supply to us in your application form, and Beatrice briefly touched upon them. So make sure that your application is complete. Application form part A is structured data, which means that you're going to have to do this input in the portal. Application form part B is something that you will be uploading. So it's a template you will be filling in and uploading. I'm not going to read through every single document on that list, but make sure that you have it close to you when you are preparing and submitting your application. And you can literally tick them off as you go along. So make sure you have all of these. The last two, just to make a quick point, the last two which have been highlighted in reddish, you will notice that they are not needed for public bodies, member states, certified TSOs, and international organizations. There's also a specific checklist for works. So this checklist will apply for electricity and gas PCIs, where you will need to submit a CBA, a CBCA, and a business plan. So this does not apply for hydro pumps. For smart grids, also beware that a business plan is part of your application form, so don't forget to attach that to it. My last tip to you is proofread your proposal. It's obvious and everybody should do it, but I think it's probably one of the most important ones. Proofread it. I would go as far as saying that perhaps you can ask somebody from another department to proofread it to see whether it makes sense to them, whether it's clear, consistent, and coherent. If you're able to have access to a native English speaker, perhaps ask him or her to read it for you. All of these things will contribute to the quality of your proposal. So I'd like to wish you all good luck. We all look forward to seeing high-quality proposals in the coming call, and that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Bianca, for such a clear and enlightening presentation. Now we move on to the next presentation, which is going to be done by my colleague Ona Kostinete-Grinkevichene. She's Head of Sector in Electricity and Smart Grids in our CEF Energy unit. And she will be presenting to you how to include information on budget in your proposals. And in fact, this presentation will cover some of the questions already addressed in Slido. So please pay attention, and over to you, Ona.
Thanks, Juan. Indeed, my presentation actually is about budget management and costs. And if we go to the first slide, the start point of your consideration for the budget is needed from the cost perspective. And the first thing what you need to do is actually identify your costs and prepare your budget. Now, I try to give you a couple of tips how to do that. And the first one that I would strongly suggest is actually reading the requirements in the call text. So section 10, which is titled Legal and Financial Setup, actually gives you an outline what exactly you need to consider while identifying your cost and compiling your project budget. It includes start and end date of your proposal, scope of it, already mentioned by Bianca, like milestones, deliverables, amount of a grant that you plan to apply for, and very important is a cost eligibility rules. What costs are eligible? Later on, I will give you a couple of hints. However, it is your responsibility actually to familiarize yourself with the rules outlined. Then we suggest you to look at the budget categories that actually are eligible under this call. Following reporting and payment arrangements, liabilities, in case you are applying with another applicant, and etc., etc. So it is very important actually that you read overall model grant agreement before you start your application, because there might be some rules which actually either make an impact on your costs or could actually reshape your proposed project's budget. Now, let's go to the next slide, which I wanted to give you a bit of examples on eligible and non-eligible costs. So, as it is written in the model grant agreement, which is also is a part of the documentation for the call, so you can find it in the tender portal. Every cost which you label as eligible shall be necessary for the implementation of a project. What does it mean in practice? So you need to have costs which are meant for the scope that you plan to apply for. An example, if you are applying for the technical design of a project, then obviously the costs which are related to an environmental impact assessment might not necessarily be part of this design. Then they really should not be part of the application. If you are applying for the construction of the, let's say, pipeline or electricity line, so this is works proposal. So as it is very clearly stipulated in the call text, study-related costs then cannot be part of works application. Next important element for eligibility of the cost is that they should be reasonable, verifiable, justified, and, as Bianca already said, complied with sound financial management principles. So in terms of the procurement, we really need to follow this, at least the sound financial management principles if you are not contracting authority within the meaning of EU procurement directives. Couple of examples on non-eligible or ineligible costs. A number of them are already stipulated in the call text and model grant agreement. Here are a couple of them. Return on capital, VAT, cost of land and building acquisition, including easements, currency exchange losses, in-kind contributions by third parties, indirect costs, and excessive or reckless expenditure. I want to emphasize a bit of an indirect cost concept. So we do not have the costs which are, for example, for your offices, for your computers, for electricity bills as eligible costs, because they are indirect costs. And as regards excessive and reckless expenditure, I also want to emphasize that you need to be very cautious on how public money will be spent overall. So anything which is really excessive and not needed for the purpose of the implementation of your proposed project shall not be included and in the cost, at least for the CEF grant part. Now, let's go to the requirements, very specific requirements that we have. So for budget related requirements for the proposals, you have two tables to fill in. One table is so-called detailed budget breakdown per cost category, and I will explain what it is and show it. And the second one is a detailed budget table per work package, which also includes the requirement per reporting period per applicant affiliated entity. Both tables are mandatory, and either they need to be directly encoded in the application in the portal or submitted with each proposal. And maybe we start first with the next slide, which might look quite scary in terms of the magnitude of the columns you see. However, this is an example. And I really want to make sure that the message is passed. Not all columns are applicable for CEF Energy call for PCIs. I will try in a later presentation to explain to you which ones you need to not consider. However, again, these columns are configured in such a way that you won't be able to encode anything in case this is not eligible. In some cases, the encoding is possible. However, you need to be very cautious that you check which columns are actually specifically needed for your proposed project. So the detailed budget breakdown per cost category is a so-called structured information. It is directly encoded in the tenders and funding and tenders portal. And there is an example of it with all documentation under this call. So you can actually try to, modulate that or, kind of help yourself with the potential calculation in case you need. Otherwise, you can directly encode, and as long as the application is not submitted, you can change all numbers there. It is very important that you encode it per participant and per affiliated entity. Here, I want to make a parenthesis on the affiliated entity. So affiliated entity is described in the call text, and it shall be indeed an affiliated entity to the participant. So, for example, if you already have procured a contractor to do the job for the given work package or task within the work package, and this contractor is actually not having any financial or legal links to you, this is not an affiliated entity. Affiliated entity is a company which is either your daughter company or sister company, which actually has financial and legal links to the participant. So be cautious here and make sure that you encode financial data of this affiliated entity while clearly knowing what is the affiliated entity. And another point is that affiliated entity is supposed directly ask for reimbursement of costs. So if for whatever reason, you yourself as participant plan to pay to affiliated entity and reimburse their work, then within the meaning of this exercise, this affiliated entity cannot be labeled as an affiliated entity. It is a simply contractor or any other entity which implements the action. Now, let's go to the details, and here I want actually to expand what my colleague Frank said in the morning session about co-funding rates. So as you remember, or if you followed, the requirements in the call text say that actually the co-funding rate is up to 50%, and exceptionally you can get for certain electricity and gas works proposals, where there is an evidence of significant positive externalities, up to 75%. I make an emphasis on up to. However, e-grants actually have the co-funding rate set. So you will see here only 50% for co-funding rate, which automatically is embedded in the table and automatically calculates the proposed CEF grant for you. If you apply for works under electricity and gas, you actually can have exceptionally the co-funding rate up to 75%. Here in e-grants, it is fixed at 75%. Now, I want to say that while the tools actually provide a fixed co-funding rate, the ultimate reward can be lower than those fixed rates. So that you need to have in mind while actually working on your budget table. Now, the next element in the next slide, what I wanted to say is that the budget categories are based on these labels. So I specifically made you per letter. So A, it's personal costs, B, it's subcontracting, and C, and you have 3 C's column, it's purchase. And these are different types of purchases that you need to outline in this budget breakdown per cost category. Then you very clearly have no for financial support to third parties. So this column is not applicable for CEF Energy PCI call. And again, the land purchase that I already mentioned are not applicable, and indirect costs are not applicable. these columns are here listed due to IT system constraints. If you have studies, right, then the column studies should not be as well fixed here, so there are no costs related because it's a study action. For works, this column is not applicable, as I already said, because we do not have mixed proposals. If there are synergetic elements mentioned and if they are applicable only, so it's not a given, you don't need to invent synergetic elements to cover that, but if you do have and they really fit the requirements under the call text, then you can include some costs under synergetic elements. I don't think so that we have any PCI for in outermost regions, so then basically none of the applications under this call can include the costs for this category. Then let's go a bit to the next slide, which outlines the cost categories. So as I said, it's A, B, C. And the A, we have personnel costs. And I again remind here the point which was, I think, raised by Beatrice before, that project management costs should not exceed 10% of the total cost of a project. And they really need to be justified. So anything which is beyond this limit will be rejected. And as you see under the bullet point, you have 3 types of personnel costs, A1, A2, A3. The descriptions of what exactly that means is in a model grant agreement. So as I said before, it is very important that you read it. Then cost category B, it's a subcontracting cost. Normally everything what you propose for the project's tasks are under subcontracting in CEF Energy PCIs. You want to contract a third party to do a study for you on environmental impact assessment, on design, on construction. All these costs, as long as they are subcontracted, they are under subcontracting cost, which is cost category B. And again, a parenthesis, a reminder to what was told by Bianca. Procurement is an absolute must and will be really scrutinized. Then, under purchase, we have the 3 subcategories, C1, C2, C3, and here on the slide, you see examples on what exactly these costs are about. I want specifically draw your attention to the category C2, equipment. Honestly, in CEF Energy PCI calls, we are not supposed to have a lot of costs, or if at all, under this category, because normally they are subcontracted. So as long as you do not subcontract and you have a good reason why you do not subcontract, then the C2 category can be used. From the current experience, I can tell that these are very limited cases, if at all, so be careful in using this category. Let's go then to a next table, which we call detailed budget table per work package. This table is unstructured information, and you can actually have an Excel template which is available in the submission system. You download it, and once you fill it in, you need to upload it as a part of application. And as I said before, it is a mandatory part, so you need to be very careful not to miss that. And this table actually is based on costs which are per work package. And of course, you can have more than 1, 2, 3 work packages, depending on the scope of your proposed budget, proposal. What is important here, that this table per work package needs to have budget per participant, including affiliated entities if they applicable. And you can have obviously several participants per work package. So every participant which actually contributes to that work package needs to have a budget there. And per reporting period. I will cover a bit what the reporting period is. For your ease, you actually have guidelines on the first sheet of this Excel table, and it mostly calculates also all figures per work package and per applicant of each reporting period. So next slide shows you actually extract how this table looks like. So you have 5 sheets plus the sheet on the guidance. So every sheet, as you see, is indicated in the order, and we strongly advise you to actually fill the data per the sheet's number, because in some cases the data which comes, for example, in sheet number 2 actually is replicated in subsequent sheets as long as you save it. The step 5, so the encode value from the grants and difference. So this sheet is very important because it's a consistency check with the amount from funding and tenders portal. So make sure that once you have the previous table, detailed budget table per cost category filled in, you encode the same amount for the grant here. And if there are inconsistencies, then this table will show you. And normally it shall not be. I think Banca made it very clear that inconsistencies are actually not something that we really need in your application, because it might jeopardize the entire process for you to get the CEF grant. So here I want to make a special emphasis on the reporting periods. So standard reporting period is 24 months. What does it mean, 24 months? So that means that after 24 months, you are entitled to ask for interim payment. We call it a REPA process in e-grants. So this 24 months period actually needs to be filled in with milestones and normally deliverables that could witness the progress of your proposed proposal. So if the project has no milestones within 24 months and you come with a payment request, then obviously that might raise a lot of issues, what exactly you spent money for. So be aware of that and make again the consistency between the milestones, deliverables planned, and your reporting period. I give here an example of how the reporting period should look like. So let's say the project's duration planned is 54 months. So then you have 24, and 6-month reporting periods, and you need to encode them. So basically, as you see here, you need to make sure that you have the actual dates, start date and end date encoded. That, let's say, 1st of January 2024 and 1st of January 2026. Reporting periods can't be shorter than 6 months. So let's take another example. For example, the duration of your study, let's say study, is 36 months. So of course you will then go for 18 and 18 months reporting periods. So don't slice them in a short tranches. Again, as I said, after each reporting period, you are entitled to get reimbursement for the cost spent in that reporting period. Now, I want to summarize in the next slide a bit of list of tips. So again, to reinforce, you really need to match the costs between tables. The one per cost category, which is structured in the tools, and the one which is in Excel per work package. And in case the divergences will appear, we will use only the table per cost category, which might have an impact on the quality of your proposal. Then again, it is very important that you read model grant agreement before the submission of the application. And like cost eligibility elements, types of costs, they should be known to you upfront, and they should be quite clearly reflected in the application. It's not uncommon to find the costs which are not eligible when unfortunately they are not then receiving CEF funding, and the application risks to be actually not granted CEF funding with these mistakes. And something which you need really to do it upfront is prepare your accountancy. anything what you will be receiving under CEF funding needs to be very clearly attributable. So you receive an invoice from your contractor, it needs to have clearly the reference to the cost category, either personnel, subcontracting or purchase, and per work package, so to the given beneficiary or affiliated entity if applicable. So these elements actually need to be pre-prepared before you start working on CEF grant implementation, and be aware that sometimes, depending on the status of your accountancy system, it might take a long time. So the advice we give to our beneficiaries is actually to make these arrangements before you apply. That would be in a nutshell, and I saw that there are some questions. I will reply them in the FAQ session later on if I haven't replied so far. Thanks.
Thank you, Ona, for this very comprehensive presentation. We move on now to more legal matters, to our colleague Giulia Fraschetti, legal advisor at CINEA. She's going to give you an introduction to CEF2 legal provisions, and she's going to explain to you the main parts of the grant agreement that you will be signing if you're successful with your proposal, and the main obligations and rights that you will have as a beneficiary. Over to you, Giulia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Giulia Fraschetti. I'm a legal advisor, member of the legal team. As Juan was saying, today I will explain to you the main legal provision of the grant agreement, and I hope you will find my presentation interesting. So, first of all, the grant agreement, as it has been previously said, it's a contract that you, as beneficiaries, probably, you will sign with the agency. Please bear in mind that this is a corporate document which has been agreed with commission services, of course, mainly the legal service. So the fields you will find in this contract are already agreed and so cannot be changed unless there will be minor changes. And most important thing, this contract will list all your rights and obligations that you will have to comply with during the whole project implementation. We can move to the next slide. Please know that the grant agreements have a specific section, which is the Annex 5, where all the obligations and rights will be clearly described. I will go through them at the end of the presentation. Now we can move to the next slide, because I think what it's more interesting for you is who are the main entities who are member of this contract. So from one hand, we have beneficiaries, but also affiliated entity, associated partner, and subcontractor. So let's see more in details who are they and what their rights and obligations. Well, beneficiaries, of course, are those who sign the agreements. They do have rights and obligations towards the agency. Please bear in mind that in case there will be several beneficiaries, it is mandatory to nominate a coordinator. The beneficiary who are not coordinator must accede the grant by signing an accession form. As it was previously said, all the communication with the agency are done via the portal, so also this accession form must be signed via the portal. And we do highly recommend to set up a consortium in case there are several beneficiaries. What about the affiliated entity? So as Ona was saying, first of all, an affiliated entity is an entity having a legal and capital link with the beneficiary. But please bear in mind that this link cannot be limited it cannot be limited to the action, but also cannot be established for the sole purpose of the action implementation. So this entity must exist before. The tasks that affiliated entities must carry out are clearly listed under the Annex 1. The affiliated entities can declare cost under the same conditions as beneficiaries, and please bear in mind that affiliated entities must comply with the same eligibility criteria as beneficiaries. They do not fall under the exclusion criteria. Affiliated entities work under the monitoring of the beneficiaries. So it's up to the beneficiary or beneficiaries to make sure that affiliated entity carried out their tasks as attributed under Annex 1. We can move on to the next slide to talk about the associated partner and subcontractor. So associated partner is very different from the affiliated entity. Of course, they also have the obligation to implement their tasks as listed in the Annex 1, but they may not charge cost to the action, and the costs for their tasks are not eligible. Once again, it's up to the beneficiary to make sure that the associated partner will carry out their tasks in compliance with what is written under Annex 1. And associated partner may be linked to the beneficiary, but this is not, or to the consortium, but this is not an obligation as it is for affiliated entities. And I would like to talk more about subcontractor. Subcontracting, it's a very frequent way we observe to implement a project, but please bear in mind that only certain part of the project can be subcontracted. The use to this contract must be necessary. The eligible cost in this case is the price charged by the subcontractor to the beneficiaries, and of course it must be included in the estimated budget. But let's see in the next slide more in detail what a subcontractor does. So first of all, in case when we talk about subcontracting, it means that there is a contract between the beneficiary and the subcontractor. And so it's up to the beneficiary to monitor once again that the subcontractor will carry out the tasks assigned. We have a subcontractor in place in case we need to acquire something or a service must be carried out. But please bear in mind that only a limited part of the tasks concerning the project implementation can be subcontracted. Most important thing, as Anna was previously saying, is that the subcontracts must be awarded in compliance with the sound financial management principles, which means applying the best value for money principles or the lowest price, or again, in compliance with the public procurement rules, if applicable. I'd like to talk now in the next slide about the roles and the responsibilities of beneficiaries. So previously I mentioned that in case there are several beneficiaries, you need actually to nominate a coordinator. Please bear in mind that the coordinator will be our main contact point for every kind of communications. At the same time, the coordinator has specific obligation towards the beneficiaries because it's going to be the one in charge of distributing the payments. Is also be the one to submit the pre-financing guarantees and to review all the documents requested by the agency during the whole project implementation. At the same time, even if we have a coordinator in place, beneficiaries, you have specific obligations because it's up to you to make sure that all the data stored in the portal are up to date. You have the obligation to inform CINEA in case there is any event or circumstance which will affect the project implementation for any reasons. And also you have to submit to the coordinator in due time several documents. First of all, the pre-financing guarantee, as I was previously saying, but also the deliverable and the reporting during the whole project implementation. But we will talk about your reporting obligation later on. And also, please, make sure that you submit via the portal all the data and information related to the participation of your affiliated entities. Concerning the payments, so as it was previously said, when we talk about payments, we can distinguish three kinds of different payments. We have the pre-financing, the interim payment, and the payment of the final balance. The pre-financing intervene within 30 days after the signature of the agreement, while the interim payments can be are more than once, and they are paid within 90 days from receiving the periodic report. And then you have the payment of the balance, which intervene after the end of the project, and it is paid within 19 days from receiving the periodic report. Concerning the reporting, so first thing, concerning the language of the reporting, I'd like to say that it's the same language of the agreement, so it's going to be English, probably. The action duration is divided into one or more reporting period. During the whole project implementation, it's up to you to inform the agency about the state of progress of your project, which means informing the agency about the outputs, milestone, and deliverable of your project. Once again, all this communication must be done via the portal using the template which are published into the portal. The reports are composed by two parts. One is a technical part and the other is a financial part. Both parts must be filled in. And the periodic report must be submitted within 60 days after the end of the reporting period. I'd like also to underline that this report must be submitted also to the member states that support the action, as clearly said in the Annex 5 of the grant agreement. Now I'd like to talk about amendments. This is a possibility you have to request an amendment. Please, first of all, I'd like to underline and to stress that the idea of the amendment is not to change the whole structure of the grant agreement you signed with us. Minor changes can be justified. Of course, your amendment request must be duly justified. And also, more importantly, the amendment request must be submitted to the agency while the agreement is still in force. And so before the payment of the final balance. Yes, in certain cases, duly justified, an amendment request can be accepted from our side after the end of the project, but before the payment of the balance. But in this case, the amendment will concern only, I would say, minor changes, like administrative details, like the change of a bank account. An amendment entered into force on the day of the signature, and they must be signed within 45 days from the reception of the request. Now we can move on to the next slide. It's about, here it concerns more obligation you have, which are listed once again under the Annex 5. Please, we want the public be aware about the source of the funding. So we would like the public know that your project received the support of EU funds. So make sure to inform the citizens via your social accounts and websites about the source of the funding. And also make sure to use like the European flag and our emblem to ensure the visibility of our funding. And this is it's an obligation. It's not just a recommendation. In the end, I would like also to attire your attention on the fact that both beneficiaries and the agency may suspend the action, of course for different reasons, but also you as beneficiary may suspend the action in exceptional circumstances in case, for example, the implementation of the project became impossible, or you can even terminate the action. But please be aware that we can also suspend and terminate the grant agreement or even reduce the grant amount in case we do identify some errors, irregularities, or fraud during the actual implementation, or even if we realized that there are too many risks for the project to be completed. So it's the end of my presentation. I hope you found it interesting and it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. It was indeed very helpful and very useful, and I hope that our applicants will appreciate the information you shared in your presentation. And now we move on to the final presentation of this block, which will be done by my colleague Gloria Balilari. She's Evaluation Manager for us at CINEA, and she's going to walk you through the main aspects of the proposal submission and important information you have to take into account in order to successfully submit your proposal. Over to you. Thank you, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. Hello, everybody. I will navigate you through the submission environment, so you will see step by step how to submit an application. I will also show you where you can find the already published frequently asked questions, and then I will have a few last recommendations, but it will be mainly a repetition of what has already been said. So before you start creating your proposal, before you access the funding and tender opportunity portal, please make sure that all people will be involved in the preparation of the application have a valid EU login account. You should also make sure that all involved organizations have a PIC. The participant identification code is a 9-digit unique code that each organization should have in order to be able to apply for funding in the portal. Once you have all these, you can then go to the portal and start the submission process. If, on the other hand, one of the people involved in the preparation of the application do not have a valid EU login, then you can create one. Here you have the link to the EU login page where you can create the EU login. And then also the same applies to the organization. If one of the organizations, be it the main coordinator or one of the partners, do not have a PIC, then they should also register in the participant portal, in the part called the participant register, and for that they will also need the EU login, so that's very much linked. So once you have everything settled, you can go to the funding and tender opportunities portal. You have several ways of finding the call. You can either write here the acronym of the call, if you know it, or you have here in the main page of the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal the list of EU programs. So you will find CEF, and then you will go to another page where you can scroll down and find the call. But the best way would be to use the two links provided here that lead you directly to the two topics. So this call has two topics, one for works, one for studies. We do not have a call page as such. We have the topic page, and that's very important because here you can find all the relevant information. You will find the objective of your topic, the expected outcome, the conditions, be it admissibility or eligibility, the documents. Apart from the call documents, you can already find here also the templates that you will have to be filled in, but beware that you do not have to fill them in here. Here they're just for information purposes. I will show you later on where to submit where to download and then submit your documents. You can also, you have also a partner search page in the topic page. And then I will show you later on where to find the topic related frequently asked questions. And you also have, very important, a part on how to get support. So there you have all the email addresses and also the links to email addresses or pages where you can find technical support or support on the content of your application. And then later on, here you will find updates on the call status. You will find, for instance, after the deadline, the number of proposals that have been submitted. And you will also find information about where to find the slides of the info day. And then you will have also a part where we will publish the funded proposals after everybody has received the notification letters, obviously. Very important, the submission service. Here you will be able to submit your application. You will have to make sure that you choose the right topic, because once you click here on confirm, you won't be able to change topic anymore. So if you realize that you haven't chosen the right topic, then you will have to start the application from scratch. There is no possibility to change the topic while once you have started your application. So here you have a last chance, let's say, to check that you choose the right topic. Once you get into the proposal page, let's say, you have to indicate your PIC, so that's why the PIC is so important, as I said before. If you have forgotten your PIC, you can do a search by name, but if on the other hand you do not have a PIC, you have to go, as I said before, to the participant register and to create one. Once you put your PIC, then a number of information will already be, some information will already be filled in automatically, such as the name of the organization and the address. And then you can go to the next part, and you will be able here to state the role in the proposal. So normally it will be the main contact person. You can already indicate your acronym and the short summary, but this part will then, you can then update it later on in the general information of part A of the proposal. Here again, you can have also, if you need support, you have all the links to the IT help desk, to frequently asked questions of a more IT nature. And then once you click here on save and go to next step, the application form is generated. You will receive also a notification, an email, and you will then be able to continue your application later on. So you can basically go back and forth to your application as many times as you want. Even once you have submitted it, you can again open it and modify it, but obviously keep in mind that that cannot be done after the deadline. So it's important also that you are very aware of time. So in this page, you can add more contacts, you can add partners. Also, partners need to have a PIC, so that's very important. And you can start downloading the templates. So the application is made up of two parts. The part A, it's the administrative form, and it's to be filled in online. And then the part B, it's the actual application, the content of your proposal. And it has to be downloaded, where I showed you before here, together with the annexes, and it has to be filled in offline, so in your computer, and then uploaded as a PDF. For the annexes, you have different formats, and that is indicated here. So here you have, this is the place where you will have to upload your part B once it's completed, and all of your annexes. So you will have, you will see, now I don't know if you can see, but it's in a little eye where you get all the relevant information about your the template, so the file size, the type of file. For Part B, it's a PDF. For others, can be an Excel or even a Word document. And also, there will be information on the characters. For Part B, it's 120 pages maximum. And also information on the file size. So here you have all the important information that you need. So this is for Part B and the annexes. And for, you see here that it's written edit form. So here you can continue editing your Part A. And I will show you now how what the Part A looks like. So you have 4 parts to it: the general information, where you can fill in the acronym and the title, the duration, and the PCI. Basically, once you choose the PCI, you will have the energy sector and the priority corridors that will automatically display. And you will also see that your acronym will be updated with the information of the PCI, so country and PCI. Then you have a part on declarations, still in the under general information, where you will have to tick the declarations. Then you have the part about participants, so you will see all the information that you have included before via the PICs, and you will be able also to add contact persons and to fill in the missing information. You then have the budget. This is the summarized budget, so it's not the budget that Ona showed before. It's per partner, and very importantly, this has to match the detailed budget. If there are differences, then this budget will have priority. We will take into consideration what is written in this budget. So please make sure again that there is consistency between the various documents. Then you have the part on other questions. Here it's number 4 and then number 5, so there is a bit of confusion, but so don't worry, there is not something missing, it's just a technical IT issue. So here you have to reply to all the questions and not to forget to add the countries at the end. Again, everything will be filled in online, and you will have the possibility to save and then to get back to the form. Part B, as I said before, is the core of the application form. It's the content, the technical part, where you will have to demonstrate that you are in line with all the award criteria. It is to be filled in outside of the system and then to be uploaded as a PDF together with the other annexes. So once you have done all your work, you have filled in all the annexes, you have uploaded them, you will see that you have a very useful validation button that will show you if everything is okay or if there are some errors. So some errors will be in yellow and others in red. So the red errors are blocking, and they will prevent you from submitting your application. On the other hand, the yellow warning could be something missing that it's not blocking, but still it's worth having a look at them because you do not want to submit an incomplete application, because then at evaluation stage it could be a problem. So once everything is validated and you do not have any yellow or red warnings, then you can submit your application. As I said before, you can still go back to your application via the My Proposal page. You will get also a direct link to it by email, but it's really very important that you do not wait until the last minute. I think we have already said it many times, but I think it's very important to repeat this. Then in the topic page, you also have the topic-related frequently asked questions. We have already published some 150 frequently asked questions, so please have a look at them. You can do a search here to find the frequently asked questions. And if you still do not find what you're looking for in the frequently asked questions, you can contact us via the functional mailbox CINEA CEF Energy Calls. There is a page of frequently asked questions also for IT technical related issues. You have over 6,800 frequently asked questions already replied, so you have high chances of finding what you're looking for, hopefully. And if you do not find what the information you're looking for, you can contact the IT help desk. You have here a link to contact them. Voilà, but hopefully you will find the replies to your questions here. Some reminders, very important, the deadline. Keep in mind that it's on the 5th of September at 5 p.m. But obviously, do not wait until the last minute, as it was already mentioned, as there could be technical issues. The Funding and Tender Opportunities portal is used by all the services of the Commission. You have there all the EU programs, so it can get very busy. We do not accept any paper or email submissions, so the Funding and Tender Opportunities portal is the only way for you to apply under CEF. Again, all beneficiaries must be registered in the participant register and get a PIC. And then, yeah, very important, make sure that you use the appropriate template, those that are available under the submission system, and make sure that both Part A and Part B are complete. So that's it from me, I think.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for your presentation. It was very clear, very helpful. With this, we have reached the end of the second session, the last presentation, and now we have, again, a session for Q&As. Let me remind again, and first of all, to all our audience that all the presentations and recordings of this Info Day will be made available on our website, on the page of the event. So feel free to go there again and listen to the presentations, consult the presentations, because you may find still the answers to your questions there. And please check as well all the FAQs that we have already published on the Funding and Tenders portal. This said, let's see which questions we have still received and have remained unanswered. So the first one I will read aloud. What is the schedule of payments of granted funds? Are there tranches according to any milestones? I refer to CEF studies. Thank you. So I would remind the information already shared by the presentation by my colleagues Ona and also Julia. So all actions that will be selected for funding, they will receive several payments on several timings. First of all, there is a pre-financing payment upon signature of the grant agreement of an amount between 25 and 50% of the grant. Depending on the case, this is established on a case-by-case basis, depending on different factors. Then there is a possibility to receive interim payments during the implementation of the project upon reception of interim payment requests together with the periodic reporting reports, the so-called REPAs. And this depends on the reporting periods for the project, how they are defined. And at the end of the action, once it's completed, the beneficiaries have to submit to us a final report and final payment request for the remaining part of the grant. And this applies both for studies and works, as I said, depending on how the reporting periods are defined. So we can move to the next one. Is there an Excel spreadsheet? Is there an Excel spreadsheet or guideline that helps to calculate eligible cost of the project based on examples? Well, on this matter, I would say that, first of all, there is among the documents that you have to submit with your application, there is one document which is an Excel spreadsheet, the financial spreadsheet, which complements the financial information for your project. That template will allow you to indeed include all information on your cost and the financial analysis for your project. But the information on the budget, this has to be filled out as part of the budget tables that my colleague Ona has presented before. So I would invite the applicant who has submitted these questions to consult again the presentation on the budget provisions and the budget tables. And you will see there how all the costs of the project have to be encoded and have to be included in the application. Okay. Next question is 5.84 billion euros, the final amount for 2021-2027. So at the beginning of the first session this morning, our head of department presented the total amount of the budget for CEF Energy between 2021-2027, and this is 5.35 billion euros. Next question. So if a project has an infrastructure connecting an EU member state with the UK, will the cost of the full infrastructure, including the part located in the UK, be eligible? Thank you. So on this question, first of all, it's important to bear in mind that you have to consider that only proposals related to projects or part of projects which are in the 5th PCI list are eligible to apply to this call. So that's the first consideration to make. And then the fact of being UK, as for any other third country, if the infrastructure belongs to the PCI, is part of the scope of the PCI, and the costs to be incurred are considered eligible, then yes, the cost of this infrastructure could be declared eligible if it's found as such by CINEA, if it's considered that it complies with all the eligibility conditions. Okay, next question. What are the outermost regions? So this has already been replied in Slido. Basically, the outermost regions, these are geographically very distant territories from the European continent, but they still belong to the EU. So these are the French Guyana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Mayotte, Ile de Réunion, and Saint Martin from France, Azores and Madeira from Portugal, and the Canary Islands from Spain. But it's important to remind that none of the PCIs currently included in the 5th PCI list include any infrastructure elements in these territories. So any specific provisions applying to outermost regions are not, in fact, not applicable in this call. The next question, please clarify better the definition tasks as contracts. If one activity part of a work package needs for this implementation more contracts, how this could be defined? For this question, I would refer to the information provided in the presentation by my colleague Bianca, who explained very clearly the distinction between work packages, tasks, milestones, deliverables, and contracts. So it's important to remind that in your application, you have to indicate to us all the contracts that you have already established before submission of the proposal, or that you intend or planned to establish after submission of the proposal. This you have to fill as part of the Form B of the application. And how your contracts are going to relate to the tasks, this is up to you to tell us. So in Part B of the application, you have to include information on work packages, on the tasks that belong to those work packages, and there is not necessarily a univoc relationship between one task, one contract. This is up to you. So there might be situations where one task requires to establish more than one contract for your project. This is okay. There is no restriction there. And vice versa. You may have a contract which encompasses a number of tasks. So this is up to you to define and to describe in your application. So there is not necessarily a one-to-one relationship between tasks in your project and contracts. Okay, the next question. Please clarify better the meaning of column subcontracting activity is related to contractor of the beneficiary or to the subcontractor of a contractor. So subcontracting in this context means all the work or the activities, tasks that you as a beneficiary will need to contract with another entity. So meaning all the contractors that you will have in the implementation of your project. And it doesn't mean the further levels of contracting that this contractor may have with other contractors. So we are looking at the contracts that the beneficiary is establishing with other entities for implementing the project. Of course, in the budget table, when you will include the costs related to contracting or subcontracting, you need to include there all the costs that are going to be incurred by contractors or their subcontractors. So all the costs that are not incurred directly by the beneficiary but are outsourced and contracted to other entities. I hope that this is a satisfactory reply for this question. Otherwise, let us know in Slido. Okay, and the other questions that we received on the recording. So just to remind that all the recordings will be available, all the presentations will be available. And it seems that there are no more questions incoming at the moment. In any case, you will still have a possibility, if you face questions after this session, to submit those questions to our help desk, CEF Energy Calls, and we will reply to those questions via FAQs. But please, before submitting any question, please check first the existing FAQs, because you may already find the answer there. And with this, I think we can just conclude saying that there is a survey for you to provide us with feedback on this info day. So please let us know how you found it, whether you found it useful, whether you consider you have now all the information necessary to prepare your applications. And from my side, just to wish you good luck with your applications. You have until 5th of September to submit. Please don't leave it for the last minute. It takes time to prepare an application, and it takes even more time to prepare a good application. So please don't leave it to the end. And that's it from my side. Wishing you a good day. Just one more point. Okay, we still have one more question that has just arrived. Is a GIS map required for the uploading of the documents during application? So here I would say that the submission module includes a GIS functionality, where you have to indeed include the geographical information for your project. This is not a map as such, it's not a map file, but you have to provide there with the geographical representation of the project in GIS format. In case you find any technical difficulty with that, you also have an online manual, and you have a help desk specifically on the e-grants submission module, so you can, if you face any difficulty when creating information for your project, you can use that help desk. Okay, well, if there is no further question at this stage, then we just conclude here. So thank you very much again for attending this info day. We hope it was useful and helpful for you, and just wishing you a good day. Thank you very much.